And good morning again, and welcome to Face the Nation on this Mother's Day. We're going to hear many voices on this issue of gay marriage, same-sex marriage this morning. But we're going to begin with Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, who's in Richmond, Massachusetts, and former Bush administration Solicitor General Ted Olson, who joins us from Ellison Bay, Wisconsin. Gentlemen, a Gallup poll out Friday shows that 60% of Americans say the president's support for same-sex marriage will have no impact on whether or not they'll vote for him, versus 26% who say it will make them less likely to vote for him, and 13% who say they are more likely to vote for him because of this announcement. I want to go first to Ted Olson, the conservatives' conservative, the founder of the Federalist Society, George Bush's Solicitor General. But you, Mr. Olson, joined with David Boies to argue in federal court that California's ban on gay marriage should be overturned, a case that may well go now to the Supreme Court. You've also been very active in Republican politics over the years, so I want to ask you to start here. What is your advice now to Mitt Romney and Republicans in general on how to handle the statement that the president made?
Well, I think it's very important for everyone, Republicans and Democrats alike, liberals and conservatives, to recognize that the right of individuals who love one another to get married and to be respected and treated with equality and dignity is exceedingly important. The more people understand that people have been waiting for years for the opportunity for their relationships to be treated equally and so that they can form a loving household is exceedingly important. And it's an American value, and we should all recognize that.
Do you think it was a smart political move for the president? Because many people, and most polls show that gay and lesbian voters would have voted for him anyway. Is this going to help him politically, or will it hurt him?
Bob, no one asked me for political advice. I would say that it's an important statement as an American, as the President of the United States, to recognize the equality and dignity of our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters and friends and neighbors. That's what's important, not what was right or wrong or popular or unpopular politically. I don't know about politics. I do know about human rights and constitutional rights, and on that basis, I think the president did the right thing, and I'm very glad he did it.
I would argue with you on one thing. I think you do know about politics, but we won't go into that right now. Governor Patrick, many religious voters, including many black voters, are opposed to same-sex marriage. Is this issue going to threaten and hurt the president politically?
I don't think so, Bob, and I want to thank Ted for his clear and principled position on this issue, and it's consistent with the president's clear and principled position on the issue because it's about convictions. It's not about politics. You know, I dealt with something similar in Massachusetts when I was running the first time and dealing with black clergy, and the point I made to them is the same point the president makes to voters nationally, which is that we don't have to agree on everything before we work together on anything. People get that this is about human dignity. And I applaud the president for standing up for human dignity. That is an American value, and it's a real indication of this president's leadership.
Well, some Republicans have said, and we may hear this, I suspect, in just a minute or two from some of the other folks on the panel, that this really is going to galvanize, in some ways, Governor Romney's support, because there were a lot of people on the right side of the Republican Party that were not quite sure of him on social issues. Do you think some social conservatives who might have been just lukewarm about Mitt Romney may now come right over and say, I really like the guy now?
Well, they may. It's, you know, those are voters, I suspect, who are not likely to vote for the president anyway, unless they vote their interests, which are economic interests, and this president is foursquare with them and standing with them in this election and in office. I think what we know is that Mitt Romney has occupied many positions on many issues, and he has, you know, back in 1994 when he was running for the United States Senate, he said publicly that he would be better than Ted Kennedy on gay and lesbian issues. He takes a different position in front of a different audience today. I think conservative voters know that about Mitt Romney. I think the American people know that about Mitt Romney, as distinct from Barack Obama, who is running on and leading through a set of convictions.
Mr. Olson, let me ask you, do you intend to, in fact, support Mitt Romney this time around?
I fully expect to, yes. I think that he would make a great president, and he's very, very strong on so many things that I believe in and so many things that the American people believe in. I think that with respect to this issue is evolving, and the more that the American people understand we're talking about the human heart and the dignity of our brothers and sisters, more and more people will come around and decide to allow individuals the right to marry the person that they love.
All right, well, I want to thank both of you. I want to broaden the discussion out now and bring in some other folks. Also joining us this morning, Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council, Clay Aiken, who all of you know from his American Idol appearances and subsequent fame as the singer and a songwriter. Newsweek contributor Mark McKinnon, who was one of George W. Bush's campaign advisors and chief strategists. Evan Wolfson, who heads up Freedom to Marry, a group working for same-sex marriage. Tony Perkins, let me just go to you first, because I know your organization has opposed same-sex marriage from the start. So where do you see this going now?
Well, clearly, when you see where this is going in the states, 32 states have voted to preserve the traditional definition of marriage. The Gallup poll, one released into last week, actually shows a 6-point shift toward traditional marriage. We got 50% say it's okay, 48% say no, but it's shifting. And I think in part is because, as Ted Olson said, I do think people are beginning to understand more that this is about more than just marriage. I mean, couples today can live together, they can enter into civil contracts, they can get health benefits from their employer. What same-sex marriage is about is forcing the state to coerce others to accept relationships that run counter to their religious tradition. It's about curriculum in our schools. It's stepping in between the relationship between a parent and a child. And as more Americans see that there's a lot more to this than just walking down the aisle, the opposition is growing.
Well, I mean, do you see this as a line being drawn here? I mean, do you think that this will be one of the defining issues this time around? I mean, the poll says 60% of the people say doesn't.
Well, it's interesting that we've heard this quite frequently, that the social and moral issues don't matter, but it's what took Rick Santorum from 1% in the Republican primary to almost replacing Mitt Romney as the nominee. These issues do matter. I don't think the president did a political calculus to do this, because if he did, he needs to go back to the calculator, because it's a bad formula. Because when you look at the states, North Carolina, a key swing state, Ohio, they have an amendment. 16 the key swing states, 10 of them have marriage amendments. And these marriage amendments haven't just kind of barely eked across the line. They've passed on average with 67% of the public behind them. So I think he was making a clear statement. I think Mitt Romney at my alma mater yesterday made a very strong statement. Weaving it into the other issues, I thought he hit just the right tone yesterday.
Let me ask you about something that Senator Rand Paul said. We ran it at the top of the broadcast, but I just want to get your thought on this.
The president, recently weighed in on marriage, and he said that his views were evolving on marriage. And call me cynical, but I wasn't sure that his views on marriage could get any gayer.
Got a big laugh there. What's your take?
I don't think it's a laughing matter. I don't think this is something that we should joke about. We're talking about individuals who feel very strongly on one way or the other, and I think we should be civil, respectful, allowing all sides to have the debate. I'm glad that's what you're doing here this morning. But I think this is not something to laugh about. It's not something to poke fun at other people about. This is a very serious issue, and I think it's very much like the abortion issue. 40 years into Roe v. Wade, the issue is still not resolved, and I think in part is because when you go back to civil rights are rooted in natural law. Americans just don't see same-sex marriage being natural.
Let me go to Clay Aiken. You are from North Carolina. The day before the president spoke, as Tony Perkins says, your home state overwhelmingly voted to defeat an initiative that basically gave domestic partners the same rights as people who are married. You are openly gay, but did the president's statement, you think, pretty much ensure he's going to lose your home state of North Carolina?
No, I don't. I think a lot of people, I don't agree that it seals it up for him. While we certainly see, as you said, 60% of people say it won't matter, I think the people who say it will matter on either side of the equation probably were not going to vote for Obama, or were going to vote for President Obama anyway. I think as people in North Carolina start to look at this amendment and realize what it's doing, not just for same-sex couples, but for straight couples as well, they're going to reject it. The polls in North Carolina show that over 60% of North Carolinians actually support some sort of recognition for same-sex couples, be it civil unions or domestic partnerships. And it was sort of a political calculation on the part of some people in the General Assembly to get this on the ballot. And as North Carolinians see what it's done and what it will do, I think that they will support the fact that President Obama did speak out on principle. It wasn't a political calculation, you're right, because he spoke out and he said, this is what I believe. And I think that we'd like to see politicians speak out on principle a little bit more and not do things politically calculated.
Evan Wolfson, you head a group that's determined to get same-sex marriage legalized nationwide. Some activists are actually talking now about trying to move the convention from North Carolina because of that vote that they took. Do you support that?
No, I do not. I think what we need in North Carolina and throughout the country is exactly what the president exemplified, which is talking about the conversations he's had in his life with real gay people, real families. He talked so powerfully about the conversations he and First Lady Michelle Obama have had about it, and that they've had with their own daughters. And they talked about how their daughters have classmates and they can't understand why their classmates' families wouldn't be treated fairly. These are the kinds of conversations that are changing hearts and minds. We're going to see more of those conversations in North Carolina, and the arc will continue. I think what the president did was show real moral leadership, and he also underscored that when we talk about real families, it turns out there is no good reason for denying those families the golden rule of treating them as you would want to be treated, the very values he and Michelle are trying to teach their kids.
Let me now go to Mark McKinnon. You are a political strategist, and people on both sides say you're very good at what you do. You were one of the chief architects of the President Bush's victories. You wrote a piece in the Daily Beast recently and said Republicans basically need to kind of go carefully on this.
Well, I actually said that Republicans should recognize that what's important is that we have a president who leads and stands for what he believes in. President Bush won re-election in 2004, not because people liked him necessarily or even agreed with his policies. They voted for him because they thought he had core principles and he'd fight for them consistently. So I give the president great credit for voting his conscience, because when you net this all out, it's not a political winner. I mean, North Carolina is very difficult. It's a key swing state. Think about all the 9 swing states: Arizona, Iowa, Colorado, Florida, Iowa, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Ohio, and Virginia. When you look at those states and think about where's that going to help them, probably in just one, Colorado, maybe New Hampshire. But otherwise, in the rest of those states, arguably, it's a net loser. And the polling that's just been done in the last couple of days showed that 23% of independents and 10% of Democrats say it's make them less likely to vote for the president. So I think it's the right thing to do. I think it actually represents Republican philosophies, and I agree completely with Ted Olson, who's been an icon and he's a legend in Republicans. So for him to take this stance, it really sends a signal for Republicans to do the right thing. And at bottom, I agree with the great Texas philosopher Kinky Friedman, who says gay couples should have the right to be just as miserable as straight couples.
All right, I think on that, we'll take a little break for a commercial. We'll be back in 1 minute. And we're back now with our panel. I want to go back to Ted Olson, because Mark McKinnon brought out something. You have talked, Mr. Olson, about there may be kind of a libertarian strain running through part of the Republican Party that is talking about less government in people's lives, and that this might be one place where we might see a change there. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think that marriage is a conservative value. Equality is a conservative value. I'm not saying that those aren't liberal values either, but the Republican Party is the party of Abraham Lincoln. Equality and independence, and people that love one another, that wish to form a stable bond, a part of our economy, a part of our community. That should be a conservative value. 45 years ago, the Supreme Court held unanimously that 14 states that prohibited interracial marriage were violating the Constitution. In those states, Our president today, his mother and father could not have been married without committing a felony. Today, we can't believe that in America, interracial couples were not permitted to be married just 45 years ago in many states of the United States. I'm hoping that we're coming to the point where we can give the same respect and decency to individuals who wish to marry someone of the same sex. And as the Prime Minister of Great Britain said, I'm not for gay marriage despite the fact I'm a conservative. I'm for gay marriage because I'm a conservative.
Well, let me go to Tony Perkins then. How do you respond to that? Do you ever see evangelicals coming around to the point of view of Ted Olson?
No, I mean, I think, look, when you look at interracial marriage, that was wrong. There was no reason to be opposed to that because you had two people who met the definition of marriage between a man and a woman. And that's consistent with natural law, which our civil rights are based on. When you look at same-sex marriage, that's counter to natural law. And again, we see what comes along, and this is not theoretical, we've actually seen it, where parents lose the right to determine what their children are taught in school, religious organizations forced to recognize or allow their facilities to be used for weddings such as this. So I don't see that happening. I see this more along the lines of the abortion debate. This, you can make it legal, but you can't make it right. And I do not think that you're going to see the Republican Party coming to agreement on this. I do think there's this libertarian viewpoint, but the key to less government is to ensure that kids have moms and dads, not just two caregivers, because if it were two, three would be better. It's moms and dads. That's what's important.
Well, let me talk to Clay about this because he had a big decision to make. And after you had your first child, you decided that you needed to come out. And I would just like to ask you, what kind of an impact did that have on your professional career? Because I know the base of country music, which is something I know a little bit about, is fairly conservative.
I think today it's even less conservative in Nashville, in the country music world, than it was in 2003 when I was on Idol. It hasn't really had much of an impact at all in a negative sense. It's had more of a positive impact. I think between the time of 2003 to today, we've seen, as we've seen with gay marriage polling, we've seen minds changing. We've seen people becoming more open and understanding of homosexuality. I want to address the fact that, you know, what you just said a second ago. When my mother married my stepfather, she went to a Baptist church, and since she had been divorced, they wouldn't let her get married there. So churches are able to decide who gets married at a church, and regardless, obviously you've got people who make the argument that interracial relationships, back in the 70s, people made the same arguments against interracial relationships as they're making against same-sex marriages today. So I really strongly believe that in the next 20 years, we're going to look back on this and be sort of ashamed of the fact that we were against this, just as we are ashamed today that we didn't let people of different races get married.
Where do you see this going, Mark?
Well, the arc of history is bending forward, and it's not going backwards. And I respect Tony's position. I have a lot of friends like Tony who say that they take literally words that were written in Scripture 2,000 years ago. But I, like Ted, take words that were written 200 years ago in the Declaration of Independence that guaranteed the pursuit of happiness literally as well.
Are you going to take part in this campaign, Tony?
Which campaign is that?
Well, the presidential campaign.
We will be, what I have heard since the president's announcement on Wednesday are from pastors across the nation, African-American pastors, white pastors, who were sitting on the sidelines because they weren't sure about Mitt Romney. I think that Barack Obama has helped fit that missing piece of intensity that Mitt Romney is going to need. I don't endorse candidates, won't be endorsing a candidate, but certainly will be working to advance those issues that families across this country care about.
Ted Olson, are you going to take part in this campaign? Because I know sometimes you're active and sometimes you're not. Has anybody from the Romney campaign asked you to help out?
No, they haven't so far. And Bob, maybe it'll be necessary for me to participate in the campaign if we have a real close election like we had in 2000, and my skills as a lawyer can be brought to play. But otherwise, I'll wait and see if anyone asks.
And of course, what you're talking about is you argued in the Bush v. Gore, you argued for the president. And David Boies, who joined you in this argument against the ban on gay marriage in California, joined you in that election controversy. Of course, he was on the opposite side. Clay, where do you go from here? Are you going to be out campaigning? Are you going to vote for President Obama this time?
I voted for President Obama last time. I'm sure I'm just as I think all gay men and women are probably more energized to vote for President Obama now, and so I'll definitely be helping how I can.
And do you think people on the other side, Tony Perkins, are also energized by this?
Well, I think it does draw a very clear line of distinction on a very important issue. Again, this is the reason I think we see the abortion issue and this issue as strong parallels is because of the fact that it runs counter to nature, to natural law, which is what our rights are found in the Declaration of Independence. So based on that natural law, the reason will get us there. People have a hard time finding a reasonable approach to same-sex marriage.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. I'll be back in a minute with some thoughts about moms on Mother's Day. Today on Face the Nation, is America ready for same-sex marriage?
Our journey is not complete until our gay brothers and sisters are treated like anyone else under the law.
The president made same-sex marriage a cornerstone of his inaugural address. But is the rest of America ready to redefine marriage? As the Supreme Court prepares to hear the arguments, we'll hear from all sides, including Baltimore Ravens linebacker Brendan Ayanbadejo,
I believe we should be doing everything that we can to make families stronger.
Evan Wolfson of Freedom to Marry, Austin Nimitz of the Alliance Defending Freedom, conservative David Frum of the Daily Beast, and Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council.
Americans just don't see same-sex marriage being natural.
Then we'll turn to the president's trip to the Middle East and the controversy on drones here at home with House Intelligence Committee Chairman Mike Rogers, plus a panel that includes Tom Friedman, columnist of the New York Times, Bobby Ghosh of Time Magazine, and CBS News foreign correspondent Clarissa Ward. CBS chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford and political director John Dickerson will join us for analysis, because this is Face the Nation.
From CBS News in Washington, Face the Nation with Bob Schieffer.
And good morning again. This week, the Supreme Court takes up two big cases on same-sex marriage, whether the voters can say no to same-sex marriage, as they did in California with Proposition 8, and whether the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act, which defines marriage as between a man and woman, is constitutional. At the Supreme Court, people are already lining up to get in to see the arguments. Here with us to talk about those cases, Evan Wolfson, head of the group Freedom to Marry, Tony Perkins, the president of the Family Research Council, also joining us Austin Nimitz, who's part of the legal team defending California's Proposition 8, and David Frum, conservative columnist for the Daily Beast, who once opposed but now supports same-sex marriage, and Baltimore Ravens linebacker Brendan Ayanbadejo, who filed a brief in the court supporting same-sex marriage. He joins us today from Fort Lauderdale. And Brendan, I want to start with you. We haven't seen too many people from the NFL on the front lines supporting same-sex marriage. What brought you into this? You filed this brief to be a friend of the court on this. How did you become involved, and why?
Well, this is something I've been speaking about since 2009. And in my opinion, it's just the evolution of civil rights and equal rights. And athletes do a lot to change society. And this is something we can make a big difference on. It starts with bullying and kids in elementary school, and it goes all the way to legislative and treating everybody equally. So this is a fight that myself and a bunch of my colleagues, we want to take on. And we feel that everyone should be treated equally, and we're not going to stop until everyone is treated fairly. And that's especially including the LGBT community.
Well, was there one single thing that caused you to say, hey, this is just wrong, and I think we ought to change it?
Well, I think it's something we see every day. I mean, we all have coworkers, friends, family members that are part of the LGBT community. And I was always raised in Santa Cruz, California, that everybody was equal and everybody is fair. So that's why it's especially rough that Proposition 8 needs to be repealed in California. And it's just a way of life that I've always been, being a biracial kid and knowing what it's like to be part of the minority. I know what it feels like to be treated differently and discriminated. So this is no different. The way the LGBT community is treated, the same as minorities, whether it's African Americans or Latinos or Asians or even women, comparing this to suffrage and the civil rights movement. It's just the evolution of the same issue.
Tony Perkins, of course, you're on the very other side of this issue. You've been a defender of conventional marriage, but that is, marriage should be between a man and a woman. But even you recognize that attitudes are really changing on this in this country. Washington Post had a poll out here where now I think it is 58% of the people now support same-sex marriage. That's versus 36% who don't. And among young people, it's an even more overwhelming favorability. About 80% say they now support it. You said in a statement this week that abandoning marriage would place Republicans, these are your words, on the path to a permanent minority. In light of these polls, why do you think that?
Well, Bob, first off, the polls that really matter are the polls that are taken when the people actually vote on this. And when people have voted, as late as 10 months ago, 30 states have put the natural definition of marriage into their state constitutions, on average by a vote of 67%. Talk about polls. Polls, you get really what you ask for. And there's later polls out by Reuters this week, the Pew Research, that show that still not only is it evenly split in this nation, but when you look at Republicans, 63% of Republicans say it would be harmful to marriage to redefine. To redefine marriage, it'd be harmful to the family.
But you certainly don't question the trend seems to be
toward
it's okay.
If it's inevitable, as the media would like us to believe, then there's no reason for the court to interject itself in this. But the reality is, it's not inevitable. And the American people, as they've had the opportunity to speak on this, have spoken overwhelmingly. 30 states, 8 additional states have the definition of natural marriage into their statutes. So we're far from being at a point where America has embraced same-sex marriage. I mean, if you look at it, Brendan, they won the Super Bowl by 3 points. We're at 30 to, I think, 2 states where the people have actually voted on marriage. That's a pretty wide spread.
Austin, what is the best argument that your legal team can make when you go into court? You're not personally arguing this case, but you're part of the legal team. What does this hang on? What will you hang it on?
Well, the big question going before the Supreme Court is whether or not the Supreme Court should impose a 50-state solution upon this entire country regarding the debate surrounding marriage, a debate that was really very young in this country and we are just starting to have. And that's exactly what we don't need. When we see Americans of all walks of life, all different faiths and backgrounds and races and creeds engaging in this marriage debate, President Obama himself said that there are people of goodwill on both sides of this debate. And the last thing we need is to shut down the debate, have the Supreme Court redefine marriage for everybody instead of letting us work through this question through our democratic institutions. That's why we have them. The Supreme Court's not a legislature. We have legislatures, we have ballot boxes for a reason, and we're asking the Supreme Court not to interject itself in this question.
Evan, the last thing we need, that would be, I would say, you would say it's the first thing we need.
Well, the whole reason we have fundamental freedoms and rights is that there are certain things that shouldn't be put up for a vote. These are important questions for families and for individuals to decide, and the freedom to marry is one of the precious freedoms that all of us cherish, and gay people, like non-gay people, deserve under the Constitution. The ability to shape a family, to build a life, and to have these dreams. You know, a few weeks ago, the Mexico Supreme Court ruled in favor unanimously for the freedom to marry. And when the Mexican Supreme Court did that, it cited Brown versus Board of Education and Loving versus Virginia, cases in which our court here in the United States did the right thing under the Constitution. 64% of the American people in the poll you cited said that the freedom to marry is a question that should be addressed fairly and nationally, not left to every family to have to fight and struggle over. It's wrong to exclude people from marriage, and America is ready for the Supreme Court to do the right thing.
Now, David, I ask you today because you're someone who's changed his mind. You used to be against same-sex marriage. You are a Republican. You worked for George Bush. You wrote speeches for George Bush. You've been an activist for Republicans. You used to be against it, now you're for it. Tell me how that came about.
Well, in the deepest sense, I have the same view, which is I think the single most important question is how do you maximize the number of children who grow up in stable two-parent households? We know in all kinds of ways that makes a huge difference to how kids come out. And we are hardening into a caste society where some kids do better in all kinds of ways because they have two parents and others don't. Since we've started debating this issue intensely, almost now 20 years ago, the proportion of American kids who grow up, who are born outside of marriage, has risen from about a third to nearly 1/2. We will soon cross, it will become the majority way. While this social crisis is raging, we've been debating this other topic, and the two issues seem to have less and less and less to do with one another. So my concern is, instead of wasting energy trying to make 3% of the population the target for all of our anxieties about what is happening to the American family, happiness is happiness. Let 3% choose, let them lead a more fulfilled life, and then let us redirect our attention to the crisis in the 97% where children are being failed by the institution of the family and marriage.
Let me just throw a question out here to all of you. What would be wrong with letting religious institutions define marriage and what it is, and let the government define what equal rights are? And the government would be the entity that decided and ensured that everybody got equal rights, and then various churches could define what they thought marriage was, and gay people, other people could choose the church that fit their particular beliefs.
Well, if you want to talk about rights, let's talk about those rights that have been lost in the wake of same-sex marriage. And religious freedom have been among them. You've got Catholic Charities no longer doing adoptions, not providing vital services right here in this city as a result of same-sex marriage in D.C. You've got parental rights that have been lost. Parents no longer being able to determine what their children are taught, whose moral values they're taught in schools. We have small businessmen losing their rights because they won't participate in same-sex ceremonies. So you talk about rights, let's talk about rights. This ultimately is not about marriage. It's not about the marriage altar. It's about fundamentally altering society. And so you can't divide the two. David is right. And this is what I spent most of my time in until this effort to redefine marriage came about. Kids need a mom and a dad. We have decades of social science that show kids do best with a mom and a dad that are married. Now, it's not two parents. It's not, because if it were two, 3 would be better, or 4. It's a mom and a dad. And this is a distraction. You're absolutely right. But this will be a major public policy shift that will move us further away from that ideal goal of giving kids a mom and a dad, because by law, we would be denying kids a mom and a dad.
Do you agree with that, Brenda?
No, I disagree. I think marriage, kids really need love from two parents. It doesn't matter if it's a mom and a mom or a dad and a dad. Kids need love, and they're obviously not getting enough love in America because kids just haven't been going the right way. So we need to protect families by allowing same-sex couples to get married, and also we need to protect religious freedoms, because in this country we allow people to practice religion or to not practice religion. So you need to keep the two separate. That's why we're in a secular democracy, and kids just need love. It doesn't matter if it's from two parents that are of the same sex or not, and I think kids would be a lot better off if they have the love that they need, and that's why we need to protect the family unit and allow same-sex couples to get married.
Austin, when you go before the court, what about that? I mean, from just the standpoint of the law, what do you want the court to do? I mean, would you be satisfied if they just told the people in California they don't, it's up to people of California out there to decide what they want? I mean, or that this is not constitutional for them to overturn Prop 8? Or do you want to see something else? I'm not sure I understand what you all would like to see happen here.
I want the court to see what is happening right here, that we have a robust debate at this table and in this country going on about same-sex marriage. We're looking at decades of social science research, and there's new research, and people on both sides of this issue have very strong feelings about the well-being of children, the well-being of families, and the well-being of the future of our society. And this debate has just begun. We're very young into this debate over marriage and its importance to our society. And so this is the last time that we need the Supreme Court to interject itself and remove this robust debate from the hands of the people. We have these robust democratic institutions in this country for a reason, because the people are sovereign. And that's especially so with the Prop 8 case and the people in California who have now voted twice in a 9-year period on the question of marriage, and both times voted to uphold marriage as the union of one man and one woman. The right of the people to deal with and decide this important issue should not be taken away, and that is the thrust of what we're asking the Supreme Court to do.
Well, when the question of race restrictions on who could marry whom came before the Supreme Court again, the court having gotten it wrong before it got it right, the court ruled in favor of the freedom to marry, and 70% of the American people at that time were against interracial marriage. Fortunately, in America, we don't put everything up to a vote. We don't force families to put their freedom of speech or freedom of religion or freedom to marry up to a vote. But you asked the question about religion, and the reality in the country is government doesn't issue bar mitzvah licenses, it doesn't issue communion licenses, but it issues marriage licenses, because marriage is not only a religious entity in which religions are free to decide for themselves who may marry, it is also a legal and civil status that the government opens through civil marriage licenses. What we're talking about here is who can get the civil marriage license from the government in order to strengthen their family under the law. It's not about telling any religion what it must do. And you know, you asked the question about defining marriage. Marriage is not defined by who is denied it. When gay people share in the freedom to marry, it doesn't change your marriage, it doesn't change Tony Perkins' marriage. My marriage is my marriage, and it means that I'm able to share in the same aspirations of commitment and love and support and dedication and connectedness, and that my parents are able to dance at our wedding, and that our family and friends are able to support and celebrate and hold us accountable for the commitment we've made to one another. That takes nothing away from anyone else. The gay people are not going to use up all the marriage licenses when we enter marriage, and this is not just somebody saying it. We now have 9 states plus the District of Columbia, 14 countries on 4 continents in which gay people share in the freedom to marry, and the result is families are helped and no one is hurt.
Brendan, I want to ask you, in the NFL, if a player were gay, and I have no idea if there are gay people in the NFL, you may know, would a gay person feel comfortable in coming out, as it were, if he were a football player in the NFL?
Yes, I think so. You know, if you go back 3 or 4 years ago, people were a lot more harsh, and this issue really wasn't talked about, and it was a little bit swept under the rug. Now we're trying to bring this issue to the forefront, and I'm preparing, and Chris Cluey and Scott Fajita, we're all preparing and laying a foundation for the athlete, our Jackie Robinson, that does come out, that he'll be comfortable, he'll have a support group around him, and teams like the San Francisco 49ers with the It Gets Better campaign that they did, and also with the Baltimore Ravens denouncing discrimination. I think we're laying the foundation for a player to be comfortable in 2013 to come out if he is ready to do so.
Tony, sum it up from your side.
Well, this is, I wish it were just about the marriage altar. It is about much more. It's about altering all of society. With marriage goes what our children are taught, parents losing the right to define the morals for their children. It's about religious freedom, unfortunately. The two are intertwined in our culture. It's about the right to conduct your business as you see fit. So there's a lot at stake here, and it's right, Austin is right, the court should not interject itself. We've got the history of Roe v. Wade to know what happens when the court interjects itself. The pro-life movement would probably not be as strong and vibrant as it is today had the court not stepped in and forced abortion on the nation 40 years ago. So I think it would be a big mistake for the court to interject itself.
Well, we're going to stop there simply because the clock has run out, but I want to thank all of you for being with us, and we'll be back in 1 minute.
Today on Face the Nation, historic rulings from the Supreme Court and a lesson in grace from the President. In a landmark civil rights decision, the Supreme Court rules that same-sex marriage is legal across the country.
Today, we can say, in no uncertain terms, that we've made our union a little more perfect.
And in another big ruling, the court upholds a crucial part of Obamacare.
The Affordable Care Act is here to stay.
We'll take a look at what this means for the country and what's next for both issues with key players on either side. And as South Carolina mourns the victims of last week's shootings, the president caps the week
Amazing grace.
with an impassioned sermon on race in America. It's all ahead on Face the Nation. Welcome to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. It's been a big week for news, and we're going to try and get through all of it. We start with the Supreme Court's ruling on same-sex marriage, and Chad Griffin, the head of the Human Rights Campaign, is with us. Chad, this was a big win for gays in America, for supporters of same-sex marriage. So is the work done?
No question the work is not done, and while this was a monumental leap forward in this country, we still have a long ways to go. You know, in a majority of states in the country still today, after this ruling, you can be married at 10 a.m., fired from your job by noon, and evicted from your home by 2, simply for posting that wedding photo on Facebook. And so as you look at the battles ahead, we've got to bring full and comprehensive non-discrimination protections to everyone living in every state in this country, and that's the next battle in Congress.
What about implementation of the ruling itself in Louisiana and in Mississippi? There's some slow walking going on there. What's the latest on that?
Well, look, this ruling was very clear. The ruling that was written by Justice Kennedy made very clear that every state has to move forward and all of the marriage bans must fall. And I expect that that's going to happen quickly. I think what you're seeing is some folks trying to play a political game, as Bobby Jindal is doing in Louisiana. But I do expect that across this country very quickly, every state, every city, and every county will move swiftly to implement this historic ruling.
Let me ask you about something the president said in his remarks in the Rose Garden. He said that those who have come so far on their journey to equality have a responsibility to reach back and help others. What obligation do you have to help others who may find this ruling troubling?
Well, look, I think there's no question that we have been on a journey in this country, a long journey to move towards that more perfect union, as the president said. And look, our laws have to treat everyone equally, and that's what this ruling grants LGBT Americans. But we also have to acknowledge there are still folks who are coming along. But that is truly the lesson of this movement. As LGBT people have lived their lives openly and out, at home, at work, at school, and church, it has changed folks' minds. Everyday Americans realize we're the people next door, we're the fellow congregant seated next to you on the church pew on a Sunday morning. We're the police officer, we're the CEO. And when folks have come to know us, they've evolved and believe that we should all have equal rights, not special rights, but equal rights. That's the lesson of this country, and that's the journey that will continue.
All right, Chad Griffin, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
On the other side of the issue, we turn to Russell Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention. I want to start with this question of, on this ruling, what can be done now for people who hold your view?
Well, I think that people have to understand that people who hold my view based on deeply held religious convictions aren't going to simply surrender those things. We can't. For us to change our views on marriage and sexuality would mean repudiating what we believe has been handed to us by Jesus and his apostles. We can't simply, we didn't make up our views on marriage and sexuality, and we can't unmake them. And so evangelical Protestants and Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox and others are going to continue to hold to our views on marriage and sexuality. We believe it's in the common good. We understand that short term things are very stacked against us here, but we ought to have the sort of pluralistic American environment where we can agree to disagree and where we can make our case without having our consciences paved over by those who would seek to do so.
So you can hold your view, but what about in a legal sense? I mean, what can anything be done?
Well, I think we're going to have to take a page from the pro-life movement and see this as a long-term strategy. I don't think that an infinitely elastic view of marriage is sustainable, and I think that we have to be the people who keep the light lit to the old ways when it comes to marriage and family, and that's going to be a generation-long skirmish. It's not going to be something that's going to be resolved in a presidential election or two.
You say infinitely elastic, but it's not really infinite.
Well, it seems to be increasingly elastic, and so we we keep moving with various rates of rapidity toward tossing aside things that just a few years ago were seen to be slippery slopes.
You mentioned the pro-life, the Roe versus Wade analogy you've made before. But in this case, it seems to me that it's a little bit different. That in Roe versus Wade, there was a kind of constant push against it. In this, a lot of the reason that the culture has changed is because people know people in same-sex relationships, and the opposition to that has diminished.
Well, but I don't think that's the case. If you look at what happened in Roe versus Wade, you had at least my wing of Christianity, evangelicals, who weren't concerned at all. We saw it as a Roman Catholic issue. You had a very lonely Roman Catholic witness against the abortion culture, and as time went on, and as people saw the implications of this, the more that they stood by what the scriptures teach on these things and by what their deepest convictions say. I think the same thing will be true here.
There will be a lot more people that you know who will have family members now as a result of this, who will now be married through same-sex marriages. What would you counsel them? What would your guidance be to a person of faith about someone in their family or a friend who goes on and gets married now?
Well, we don't hate anybody. We don't have hostility toward anyone. We believe in loving all people and respecting all people, including our gay and lesbian neighbors. And so holding to our convictions doesn't mean that we dispense with human kindness and actually with gospel spirit-driven kindness. It means that those two things go together. We have to be people of both truth and grace, of conviction and kindness, and I think that's what most Christians are doing now and have been doing for quite some time.
And last question, in terms of protections for people of faith, is there a specific protection that you would like to see in the wake of this ruling?
Well, it's really going to depend on what the victors in this ruling attempt to assert. Are they going to take a French revolutionary approach to the sexual revolution or not? And I think we have to hold by our First Amendment protections for people of faith and for religious institutions, because we're not going to be able to simply put our convictions in a blind trust.
Russell Moore, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, John.
I want to ask you about the ruling from the Supreme Court on same-sex marriage. You know, in various states there have been laws passed to protect the religious freedom of people. Where are you going to do that in Ohio?
Well, I think we need to take a deep breath. Look, I believe in traditional marriage, but the Supreme Court has ruled, and it's the law of the land, and we'll abide by it. And I think everybody needs to take a deep breath to see how this evolves. But I know this, I mean, religious institutions, religious entities, you know, like the Catholic Church, you know, they need to be honored as well. And I think there's an ability to strike a balance. Look, as job as governor, you learn to strike a balance. Sometimes you get into an argument, you get in a fight, and that's okay. But overall, what you want to do as a public official and as a leader is you want to kind of look for solutions where you can create more win-wins. And let's see how this thing develops. Everybody take a deep breath at this point.
Do you think that this ruling, though, some conservatives have said it's a real threat to the culture in America? Do you see it that way?
Look, I've said what I said about my view on it, but I think there's so many other things now that we have to focus on. You know, it's going to be job growth, defeating poverty, healing the division between races, coming up with an immigration solution that's going to be fair and is going to help people, rebuilding our national defense. That's where the energy ought to be focused on, the things that we know are vital to strengthen our country, John. I'm trying to avoid your question, but frankly, my head is now moving in the direction of what we can do to solve problems here together.
You're trying to avoid the question, which sounds like you're already a presidential candidate. When are you going to announce?
Well, first of all, I'm not avoiding it. You know, I do believe in traditional marriage, but the court has ruled, and it's time to move on. I'd be clear about that. In terms of announcing, we're getting awfully close to being able to make a decision. And, you know, look, I just want to do it if I think I have a path to win. People say I have low poll numbers, and, you know, I do, and I'll tell you why. Because I came into this office to take care of our beloved Ohio. I didn't travel outside the state. I didn't go out and politic. What I wanted to do was fix Ohio. So we went from $8 billion in the hole to a $2 billion surplus to a balanced budget to the largest tax cuts in the country and growing 360,000 jobs with everyone having a chance. Now I can go out and tell my story, and hopefully the polls will rise. We'll see. Do my best. That's all I can do, John.
That's right. That's all any of us can do, Governor. We appreciate your time. We'll look forward to talking to you when you're a candidate, and we'll be right back.